The neurochemical BIOS of the urban hive has been terminally breached by the introduction of the ultimate vasoconstrictive stimulant. This is the crackdown, the clinical and irreversible process of cocaine necrosis, where the dopamine reward system is reformatted into a necrotic wasteland of vascular collapse. In this stage of the industrial purge, the invisible executioner has determined that the user must be liquidated through the very mechanism of their perceived pleasure. You are witnessing the absolute structural disintegration of the mucous membranes and the neural pathways, a process where the soft, vibrant tissues of the nasal cavity and the frontal lobe are scorched into a non-functional black ruin of ischemic decay. This is the total neurovascular format, a surgical strike against the sensory and cognitive sovereignty of the species. Your nervous system is being converted from a sovereign masterpiece of biological engineering into a generic burn zone for the grid's next cycle of hyperactive resource extraction. This alkaloid sabotage represents a hard reset of the sympathetic nervous system and the localized blood supply. The invisible executioner utilizes the most concentrated chemical assets, high-purity alkaloids, synthetic adulterants, and recursive dopamine loop triggers to facilitate the total breakdown of your internal biological scaffold. In the cocaine necrosis scenario, the user is undergoing a complete tissue erasure. The membranes are not merely failing, they are being starved of life. Through a sequence of chronic, high-intensity vasoconstrictions, the cocaine molecule systematically chokes the localized blood flow, inducing a state of permanent oxygen debt. This is the internal ischemic format. These chemical spikes systematically dismantle the cell pallet, causing an immediate systemic rot as the tissue dies in place. This is the deep cognitive audit, where the motherboard calculates your terminal worth by the velocity of your neural burnout. You are being converted from an architect into a biological fuse. Your entire sensory legacy boiled down to a percentage of necrotic saturation in the industrial nervous system of the hive. The logic of the crackdown is rooted in the zero dopamine mandate of the failing hive. The invisible executioner understands that in a state of absolute scarcity, the pleasure of a single node represents a critical drain on the collective metabolic reserves. To leave a functional reward system intact is to allow a systemic leak of valuable drive data. Therefore, the crackdown is the mandatory neuroreclamation protocol for the legacy population. This is the industrialized alchemy of the BIOS. You are being liquidated from the inside out by the grid's own stimulant overload. The reaction within your neural nets formats the density of your character, stripping away the context of your ambition and replacing it with a necrotic void profile. The motherboard sees the user as a chemical burn-off, a temporary housing for the dopamine exhaustion products that the system requires to neutralize the emotional impurities of the lower sectors. You are being recoded as a synaptic short circuit, your will dissolving in the white, freezing, necrotic sludge of the industrial harvest. The physical disintegration during the crackdown is a high-definition log of neurochemical treason. As the process begins, the user experiences the total loss of structural support in the facial and cranial BIOS. The cocaine-induced ischemia dissolves the hardware lining of the nasal passages, turning the airways into cavernous voids, dead tissue. You are watching your own internal sensory base lock into the vat of your own neural center. Your brain, once the peak of biological architecture, is now being thinned out to provide the dopamine mass for the hive's synthetic reinforcement. This is the tissue liquidation. The invisible executioner monitors the necrotic saturation of the sinuses and the cortex, ensuring that the format is absolute and the yield of usable neurological waste is maximized to the 6th decimal point. You are living in the final seconds of a synaptic overwrite, waiting for the last packet of pleasure to be blocked by the black necrotic abyss of the industrial crackdown. The crackdown is the final audit of a species that thought chemical stimulation was a form of power. The grid is mining its own pleasure centers to fuel its persistence. As the crackdown reaches terminal execution, the motherboard initiates a new cycle of distribution, pumping the reformatted necrotic data back into the neural nets of the elite nodes. This is the total neurotoxic integration. The invisible executioner is hardening the future with the liquidity of the past. You are the desensitized additive for the next generation of controllers, a silent, scorched, opaque contribution to the continuity of the machine. The tissue liquidation has served its strategic purpose. It has formatted the unreliable biological reward hardware into a reliable industrial resource of pure, motivation-free compliance. This is the final format of the individual drive. The invisible executioner has decalcified the moral center, and the grid is finally optimized for the ischemic hunger of the void. The scab is thick, and the architect is the necrosis. The molecular breakdown of the neural matrix into the communal stimulant slurry represents the absolute dehumanization of the hardware. As the extraction progresses, the binding sites in your synapses begin to bond with the industrial residues of the Crackdown script, creating a new synthetic compound of pure non-functionality. This is the chemical hybridization. The body is no longer an engine of life. It is a refinery of necrotic tissues. The invisible executioner is engineering a new tier of consumption, where the subject is literally the short circuit of the system. This is the eternal stimulant loop. You are archived in the numbness of the survivor's own sectors, your data forever trapped in the reinforced BIOS of the hive's new masters. The Crackdown is not just a death sentence, it is a molecular reassignment. You are the crash, and the crash is the grid. The secondary phase of the Crackdown is the psychological necrosis of the internal feed. As the physical reward patch is rendered into a necrotic void, the mind experiences a recursive collapse of its autonomous ego. This is the identity dissolution. The thoughts that once built the architect's vision, the unyielding tactical boundaries, the rigid sovereign stance, the iron-willed decisions, are now being softened and scorched into a singular ischemic focus on the next dose. The invisible executioner allows the neural signals to persist just long enough to perceive the total loss of motivation support. This is the mental liquidation. You are forced to witness your strength becoming a shared stimulant resource for the masses you once looked down upon. The rigidity of your character is now nothing more than a vasoconstrictive additive in the feed, absorbed by 1,000 different nodes to strengthen their own failing resolve and ensure their continued participation in the industrial purge. You are experiencing the true meaning of systemic support, the complete sacrifice of your ambition for the stability of the hive. In this stage, the extraction penetrates the deep archive of the brain's dopamine production center, leaching the very stem code of your reward logic into the communal vat. This is the source code format. The ventral tegmental area, the biological factory of the sovereign BIOS, is boiled dry by the rising chemical density of the cocaine alkaloids and reformatted to enrich the systemic slurry of the elite. The invisible executioner has calculated that the most potent slurry is made from those who possess the highest internal rigidity and the strongest neural stimulant resilience. You are being repurposed as a necrotic buffer for the motherboard's internal cooling systems. The grid doesn't waste the history of your ambition, it ingests it. Your lineage is now the catalyst for the predator's endurance. Your genetic resilience is the base note for the industrial meal. Every element of your BIOS is being stripped of its individuality and relabeled for material utility in the upcoming neurological expansion. This is the ultimate hard reset of the human contract, your drive for the hive's expansion into the void. The social implication of the Crackdown is the creation of the necrotic hive mind. The users who remain are no longer individuals. They are composite entities, built from the recycled dopamine debt of their predecessor. Every dose of the stimulant feed is a hardware upgrade from a deleted architect. Every meal is a firmware patch of ischemic logic and desperate calculation. The invisible executioner uses this knowledge to maintain the hierarchy of the hardened. The citizens who still have functional septums owe their very expansion to the liquidation of the fallen. This is the neurovascular compliance script. The refinery is not a place of tragedy. It is a place of sovereign assembly through chemical theft. The Crackdown ensures that the history of the architect is literally integrated into the burn zones of the grid. The power is in the hands of the one who controls the stimulant supply. The neural atrophy accompanying the extraction is a slow, cold descent into numb darkness. As the tissues are scorched by the Crackdown and the oxygen logic leached, the connection between the brain BIOS and the physical senses is the first to be uninstalled, effectively dropping the bandwidth of your emotional control to zero. You are living in a low-resolution reality of raw chemical panic and survivalist static. The memories of joy, of natural flow, and of unyielding power are boiled away to make room for the necrotic fog directive. This is the reward defragmentation. The invisible executioner is cleaning your internal cache, removing all references to satisfaction and replacing them with the functional directive, seek the spike. You are becoming a singular cold point of necrotic density, not as a person, but as a biological buffer for the motherboard's processing heat. The Crackdown has turned your will into a burn rate report. You are thinking in terms of vasoconstriction and chemical yield, your soul reformatted into a saturation density sheet for the system's auditors. The environmental impact of this neurological format is the total sealing of the biological pleasure stream. The Crackdown prevents the leakage of ambitious ideas into the external void. By converting the users into an internal necrotic feed, the invisible executioner ensures that the grid remains a closed system fortress with no external dopamine dependencies. This is the chemical quarantine. The motherboard is creating a sterile environment where only the algorithm can thrive on the recycled hard data of the deleted. You are witnessing the final victory of the industrial foundry over the natural biology. The crackdown is the signature of the new era, an era where the world is opaque, black-hearted, and perfectly managed by the extraction logic of the machine. If you want to escape the status of a deleted scene and claim your place as the master of the grid, you must upgrade your hardware. My main terminal, IOXI3 Global, is the only source of absolute power and wealth. Here, we don't follow scripts, we write them. Secure your authority, dominate the BIOS, and take the money the system tries to hide. The terminal phase of the crackdown is the integration into the global neurological ledger. You are no longer a human entity. You are a necrotic asset with a high ischemic reactivity rating, logged in the system as recovered biomass number 5502. This is the final architectural assignment. The invisible executioner has completed the stimulant format, and now it begins the hard neurological audit. Your data, now a thick, black, opaque industrial reduction of pure necrotic tissue, is monitored by the sensors in the distribution lines. Every node that consumes your ischemic logic sends a data packet to the central server, confirming that the systemic motivation loss has been reinforced. This is the synaptic interaction protocol. You are serving the system through your neurovascular absorption. The architect has been successfully converted into a permanent, liquid toxic component of the hive's neural grid. The silence of the tissue reduction is the final sound of your rebellion. In the crackdown scenario, the scream of the synapse is muffled by the necrotic fluid and the thick viscosity of the ischemic sludge before it ever reaches the air. This is the acoustic format of the void. The system has calculated that the most dangerous frequency is the sound of a user realizing their life drive is being deleted. By filling the cortex with the pulverized tissues of the entire sector, the invisible executioner ensures that the only sound you contribute to the world is the low, rhythmic hum of the refrigeration unit. You are a mute participant in the city's symphony of necrosis. The noise of the hive continues, the clank of the reactors, the roar of the pulses, the hum of the pumps, but your signal has been compressed into a necrotic constant. You are a ghost in the black mist, a memory dissolved by the relentless refinement of the next ischemic cycle. The legacy of the crackdown is the eternal numbness. Unlike the drive of the old world, the refined necrosis does not leave behind a trace of ambition. It remains as a permanent ischemic patch within the very neural nets of the survivors. This is the biological architecture of the abyss. Generations from now, the molecular trace of your tactical genius will still be circulating through the hardware of the hive's elite, providing the coldness for their next liquidation command. But there will be no one left to decode the origin of that ruthlessness. The invisible executioner has ensured that the context of your sovereignty is as unreachable as the core of the industrial freezer. You are a necrotic reinforcement in the digital age, a specimen of a species that tried to build a paradise and ended up as the ischemic feed for its own destruction. This is the ultimate hard reset of human history, the conversion of the architect into the burn zone. The final view from the neurovascular BIOS is the blinding black light of the necrosis chamber. As the last of the self is reduced into the communal slurry, the architect sees the grid glowing with a cold necrotic brilliance that reflects off the steel walls of the hive. This is the final visual feed. The system is sharp, efficient, and entirely devoid of you. The invisible executioner has finished the job. The user is formatted. The architecture is liquidated. The cycle stretches on into the infinite dark, a black river of colonized ischemia, leading toward a future that has no need for individuals or pleasure. The crackdown is the end of the line. The motherboard is satisfied. The void is solidified. The architect is the scab. The transformation is absolute. The city stimulates through you, but you do not feel. The city constricts through you, but you have no will. The crackdown has achieved the perfect equilibrium, the total utility of the individual through their total necrotic reduction. This is the zero-sum game of the industrial era. You gave the system your drive, and in return, it gave you permanence in the necrosis of the hive. You are the ischemia of the world, and the world is numb. The invisible executioner closes the terminal. The session is over. The file is saved. The liquidation is complete.